The Boston sky was heavy on that autumn afternoon. Gray clouds piled up as if they were about to collapse on the city. Thomas Walker, 32, hurriedly walked through the streets of downtown, holding tightly to his briefcase as he tried to protect himself from the first drops of rain that were beginning to fall. Another day, another disappointment, he thought, recalling the disastrous meeting he had just had. His project had been rejected for the third time in a row, and the feeling of failure weighed on his shoulders like a blanket of lead. Thomas was an architect, graduated with honors from the prestigious Harvard University, but his career seemed to be at a dead end. Ever since he had lost his parents in a tragic accident 3 years ago, something inside him had broken. Inspiration that once flowed naturally now looked like a dry spring in the desert. The rain suddenly intensified, turning into a veritable deluge. Thomas ran for shelter under the marquee of a small coffee shop. The place was called Refuge, a name that seemed ironically appropriate at the time. Without many options, he decided to enter. The atmosphere was welcoming, with yellowish lights and the unmistakable aroma of freshly brewed coffee. There were few customers, probably due to bad weather. Thomas chose a table in the corner next to the window, from which he could watch the rain battering the city. "Can I help you?" The soft voice took him by surprise. As Thomas looked up, he came across a pair of green eyes that seemed to contain all the mystery of the world. The young woman smiled gently, holding a block of request. Her brown hair was tied in an unassuming bun, with a few unruly strands framing her face. "A coffee, please." "Very strong," he replied, trying to disguise the impact that this unexpected encounter had caused. "Hard day?" she asked, genuine empathy in her voice. Thomas hesitated for a moment. Normally, she wasn't one to share her problems with strangers, but something about that woman inspired confidence. "You have no idea," he sighed. "Well, in that case," she kept the pad in her apron pocket. "I'm going to bring something special. Trust me." Minutes later, she returned with a steaming cup of a dark, aromatic liquid, accompanied by a small piece of cinnamon cake. "I didn't ask for cake," Thomas commented, confused. "Courtesy of the house," she replied with a warm smile. "My name is Sarah, by the way. Sarah Bennett." "Thomas Walker," he introduced himself, extending his hand. When his fingers touched, Thomas felt something inexplicable, as if a gentle electric current was running through his body. It was a strange but comforting feeling. "The cake is my grandmother's recipe," Sarah explained. "She always said that there is no problem so big that it cannot be alleviated with a piece of cinnamon cake." Thomas tasted the cake and had to admit it was delicious. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," she said, feeling a little better. "She still is," Sarah corrected. "At 92, he remains the wisest person I know." The conversation flowed naturally from there. Thomas discovered that Sarah had a degree in English literature, but ran the coffee shop she had inherited from her parents. She dreamed of one day publishing a book, but between the responsibilities of the business and taking care of her grandmother, she never found time to dedicate herself to writing. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you do when you're not having a hard time?" Thomas laughed, a genuine laugh he hadn't given in weeks. "I'm an architect, or at least I try to be." "Oh, so you build dreams," Sarah replied, her eyes shining. "That's a poetic way of looking at it," he said, intrigued by her perspective. "Lately, I've had a hard time dreaming." Sarah watched him for a moment, as if she could see beyond the surface. "Do you know what my grandmother also says? That sometimes we need to borrow the dreams of others until ours return." Those words touched Thomas deep. There was something special about this woman, something he couldn't define, but which made him feel understood for the first time in a long time. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside that cafeteria, Thomas felt as if a ray of sunshine had found its way to him. In the following weeks, Thomas became a regular customer of Refugio. Initially, he told himself that it was only for the exceptional coffee and the cinnamon cake, but he knew deep down that it was for Sarah. Every conversation with her was like a balm to her wounded soul. On a particularly quiet afternoon, Thomas arrived at the cafeteria carrying his bag of drawings. Sarah, curious as always, asked to see her projects. "It's no big deal," he said hesitantly. "Let me judge for myself," she insisted. With that smile, he could no longer refuse. Thomas opened the briefcase and showed his latest drawing. Sarah examined them carefully, her green eyes scouring every detail with genuine interest. "These are amazing, Thomas," she exclaimed, amazed. "You have an extraordinary gift. They're just drafts," he replied, uncomfortable with the compliment. "My last projects were all rejected. it. Sarah frowned thoughtfully. Can I ask why? Thomas hesitated. It was hard to admit his faults, especially for someone he admired so much. Soul is missing, he finally confessed. That's what I was told. Technically perfect, but without emotion. Sarah nodded, understanding. I see. It's like writing a grammatically impeccable book, but without a heart. Exactly, Thomas agreed, surprised at the accuracy of the analogy. Since losing my parents, it seems like I've lost my inspiration as well. Sarah reached across the table and touched his softly. Pain can block our creativity, but it can also transform it into something deeper if we know how to channel it. At that moment, Thomas felt something unblock inside him. It was as if Sarah's words were the key to a door that had been locked for too long. Have you visited your grandmother? He asked suddenly. Sarah seemed surprised by the change of subject. I visited every Sunday. Why? I should like to meet you, replied Thomas, surprising himself with her boldness. If it's not a nuisance, of course. Sarah's smile lit up the entire coffee shop. She would love to meet him. In fact, I've talked a lot about you. Thomas felt his heart race. Did you say? Of course, Sarah replied, blushing slightly. You have become an important part of my days. That simple, honest confession made Thomas realize that Sarah had also become essential in his life. In a few weeks, this extraordinary woman had brought light to his dark day, had shown him that it was still possible to find beauty in the world. The following Sunday, Thomas met Sarah at the entrance of a posh nursing home on the outskirts of Boston. He brought a bouquet of white lilies, which he had discovered to be Sarah's grandmother's favorite flower. Nervous? Asked Sarah, noticing her tension. A little bit, he admitted. It's important to me that she likes me. Sarah smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. She's going to love him, just like me. Those final three words, just like me, echoed in Thomas's mind as they walked the halls of the nursing home. Was it possible that Sarah felt for him the same way he was beginning to feel for her? Sarah's grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, was a frail-looking lady with bright, discerning eyes that immediately reminded her of her granddaughter. Sitting in an armchair by the window, she watched the garden with a serene expression. Grandma, Sarah called softly. I brought someone special to meet her. Eleanor turned, and her face lit up at the sight of her granddaughter. When his gaze landed on Thomas, he had the strange feeling of being evaluated to the soul. So you're the young architect who's been stealing my granddaughter's time and thoughts, Eleanor said with an enigmatic smile. Thomas blushed, not knowing how to respond. He offered her the flowers, which she accepted with gracious thanks. Sit down, young man, Eleanor invited, indicating a nearby chair. Sarah, dear, could you fetch a vase for these beautiful flowers? As Sarah left, Eleanor fixed her piercing gaze on Thomas. My granddaughter told me about you. He said he carries a sadness in his eyes. Thomas was surprised by the frankness. I lost my parents a few years ago, he explained. I'm still learning to deal with it. Eleanor nodded understandingly. Loss is like an unwanted companion who refuses to leave. We can't kick him out, but we can learn to live with him. You seem to understand that well, Thomas commented. Oh yes, sighed Eleanor. I lost my husband 20 years ago, my daughter and my son-in-law, Sarah's parents, 10 years ago. The pain never completely disappears, but we learn to carry it with more dignity. Thomas felt an immediate connection with this wise lady. How did you manage to move forward? Eleanor smiled, a smile full of memory. Having someone to talk to, someone who never abandoned me, even in the darkest moments. Before Thomas could ask who she was referring to, Sarah returned with a vase for the flower. The conversation took a lighter turn, with Eleanor telling embarrassing stories of Sarah's childhood to the mortification of her granddaughter and Thomas's amusement. As they said goodbye, Eleanor held Thomas's hand with surprising firmness. Come back more often, young architect. Sarah needs someone to make her smile like that. On the way back, walking through the park between the nursing home and the bus stop, Thomas felt strangely at peace. The sky was clear, dotted with stars, and Sarah's presence by his side seemed as natural as breathing. Your grandmother is amazing, he commented. She liked you very much, Sarah replied. I can see it in her eyes. They stopped near a small lake where the moon was reflected as a silvery disk. The timing seemed perfect, almost magical. Sarah, Thomas began, gathering courage. Since I met you, something has changed in me. It's as if I were waking up from a long sleep. Sarah looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see his soul. I feel that too, Thomas. It's like we've known each other for a long time. Thomas took her hands between his own. I can't explain it, but when I'm with you, I feel like I can face anything. You brought color back into my life, and you brought hope to mine, she replied, her voice choked with emotion. At that moment, under the starry Boston sky, Thomas leaned over and kissed kissed Sarah softly. It was a gentle kiss, full of unspoken promises and newly awakened dreams. When they parted, they were both smiling, as if they had discovered a precious treasure that had been hidden in plain sight. "I think I found my inspiration," Thomas whispered. "Hey guys, if you are enjoying this love story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the sequel. Also turn on notifications to be notified as soon as the next video goes live." Now let's continue with our story. Over the next few weeks, Thomas and Sarah became inseparable. He helped her out at the coffee shop whenever he could, and she accompanied him on his walks around town in search of architectural inspiration. Together, they visited Eleanor every Sunday, always bringing fresh lilies and new stories to share. On one of these visits, while Sarah had gone out to fetch tea, Eleanor watched Thomas carefully. "You look different today," she commented. "Lighter," Thomas smiled. "I've been working on a new project, something special. Inspired by my granddaughter, I imagine," Eleanor said, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Your granddaughter changed my life, Mrs. Bennet," Thomas admitted. "I never thought I could feel this again, this desire to create, to dream." Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "Love has this power, young man. It reconnects us with the best in us." Thomas was silent for a moment, reflecting on the old woman's words. "May I ask something personal, Mrs. Bennet?" "Eleanor, please," she corrected. "And yes, ask anything you want. The last time I was here, you mentioned someone who never abandoned you, even in the most difficult moments. Who was it?" Eleanor smiled, a serene, peaceful smile. "Ah, young man, I was talking about my best friend, the one who was always by my side, even when everyone else left." Thomas waited for her to elaborate, but Eleanor just looked out the window with a contemplative expression. At that moment, Sarah returned with the tea, and the conversation took other turns. The following week, Thomas received a call that would change everything. It was from a leading Chicago architectural firm, responding to a proposal he had sent months earlier, almost forgotten. "Mr. Walker," said the voice on the other end of the line, "we are impressed with their design for the new community center. It's exactly what we were looking for. We would like to invite you for an interview in our office next week." Thomas could hardly believe it. It was the opportunity he had always dreamed of, the kind of project that could launch his career to new heights. There was just one problem. Chicago was more than 1,000 miles from Boston, from Sarah. That night, he went to Sarah's apartment, located above the cafeteria. Their hearts were torn between excitement for professional opportunity and the fear of losing what they had built together. Sarah immediately realized that something was worrying him. "What's wrong, Thomas? You seem distant." He told him about the call, trying to maintain a neutral tone, but his voice trembled slightly. "Thomas, that's wonderful," exclaimed Sarah with genuine joy. "It's the recognition you deserve, but it's in Chicago," he replied, watching her reaction closely. Sarah was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. "For how long?" "That's the problem," sighed Thomas. "It would not be temporary. If they accept my project, it would be a permanent position." The silence that followed weighed like lead. Thomas could see the internal struggle in Sarah's eyes, the happiness for her success mixed with the fear of separation. "You must go," she said finally, her voice firm despite her teary eyes. "It's your dream, Thomas. I can't ask you to give it up for me." "What about us?" he asked, feeling a lump in his throat. "What happens to us?" Sarah held his hands tight. "We will find a way. If what we have is real, and I believe it is, we will find a way to make it work." Thomas hugged her, smelling the scent of her hair, the warmth of her body against his. How could he leave her? How could it be? "I have a week before the interview," he muttered. "Let's enjoy every minute." And so they did. In the days that followed, Thomas and Sarah lived intensely, as if trying to squeeze a lifetime of moments into just a few days. They visited all of their favorite places in Boston, took pictures, laughed, cried, and in the evenings loved each other as if every moment was their last. On the eve of Thomas's departure for Chicago, they went to visit Eleanor. The old woman immediately noticed the barely concealed sadness in their eyes. "So you're leaving," she said to Thomas, not as a question, but as an observation. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, feeling guilty. "I was given an opportunity in Chicago." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "You know, young man, life rarely offers us easy paths. Often we are forced to choose between two things we love. How would you handle it?" asked Thomas, desperate for guidance. Eleanor smiled, that wise smile that seemed to contain all the answers in the universe. "I would talk to my best friend. He always helped me find clarity in moments of confusion." Again, Thomas wondered who this mysterious friend that Eleanor mentioned with such reverence was. Before she could ask, the elderly woman continued, "Thomas, do you know the story of King Solomon?" He nodded, a little confused by the change of subject. When two women were fighting over a baby, he proposed to split it in half, Eleanor continued. The real mother preferred to give up the child rather than see him suffer. Sometimes true love means letting go. Thomas felt the weight of those words. Would this be the way? Leave Sarah free to move on with her life while he followed his? As they left the nursing home, the sky was heavy, announcing a storm, very similar to the day they met. It feels like we've come full circle, Sarah said, looking up at the dark cloud. Thomas hugged her, feeling that her heart could shatter at any moment. I don't want it to be an end, Sarah. I want it to be just a chapter. Me too, she whispered, her voice breaking. But I can't leave the coffee shop, Thomas. It's all that's left of my parents and my grandmother. She needs me here, and I need this opportunity, he added, feeling the weight of the impossible choice before him. That night, instead of staying in Sarah's apartment, they walked through the city, letting the light rain wet them. They talked about dreams, fears, hopes. They promised to keep in touch, to visit each other whenever possible. They made plans that, deep down, they both knew were difficult to fulfill. When dawn came, Thomas was at the airport with a one-way ticket to Chicago and the heaviest heart he had ever felt. Promise you'll call me as soon as you arrive, Sarah said, trying to smile through her tears. I promise, he replied, holding her one last time. And I promise we'll find a way, Sarah. This is not goodbye. The announcement of the boarding rang out over the loudspeaker, cruel and impersonal. Thomas kissed Sarah one last time, a kiss that tried to say everything that words could not express. So he left, carrying only a suitcase of clothes and a briefcase with his design. He left behind the woman he loved and a part of himself that he feared he would never recover. Hey guys, is this story touching your heart? Leave in the comments what you think will happen to Thomas and Sarah. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of this exciting love story. Turn on notifications to be the first to know when the next video goes live. Chicago was exactly as Thomas imagined, imposing, bustling, full of possibilities. The architecture firm was housed in a downtown skyscraper overlooking Lake Michigan. The interview went better than he had expected. His design for the community center had really impressed the board. Mr. Walker, said the executive director, a middle-aged man with discerning eyes, rarely do we see projects with such social sensitivity coupled with architectural innovation. What inspired you? Thomas thought of Sarah, how she had rekindled her passion for architecture, how her conversations about community and belonging had shaped her vision for the project. Let's say I've found a new perspective, he replied with a wistful smile. At the end of the interview, he was offered the position immediately, with a salary that exceeded his most optimistic expectations. Thomas accepted, feeling a mixture of professional pride and personal emptiness. Her new apartment was spacious and modern, located in an elegant neighborhood of the city. But as impressive as it was, it didn't feel like home. The aroma of fresh coffee and cinnamon cake was missing. Sarah was missing. For the first few weeks, they talked daily by phone. Thomas told about his work, about the city, about the exciting projects he was involved in. Sarah would talk about the coffee shop, about Eleanor, about the regulars who always asked about it. But gradually, the calls became less frequent. The different time zones, the busy schedules, the little frustrations of everyday life, everything conspired to drive them away. When they were able to speak, there was a growing discomfort, a sense that they were living in worlds farther and farther away. 3 months after his move, Thomas was completely immersed in his new project. The community center was taking shape, not just on paper, but on the land the company had acquired. It was his first big job, the realization of a professional dream. On a Friday afternoon, while reviewing some details of the project in his office, Thomas received a call from an unknown number. Mr. Walker, said a female voice he didn't recognize. This is from the Sunset Hills Nursing Home in Boston. I'm calling about Eleanor Bennett. Thomas's heart raced. What happened? Is she okay? Mrs. Bennett suffered a stroke this morning, the woman said, in a professional but gentle voice. She is stable now, but she specifically asked us to contact her. Did you ask for me? Asked Thomas, surprised. Yes, sir. She insisted a lot. I said I needed to talk to you first. Well, she seems to believe she doesn't have much time. Thomas felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Have they informed Sarah yet? Her granddaughter? Yes, Miss Helena S. Bennett is with her now. She was the one who gave us her number, actually. Without hesitation, Thomas informed that he would be on the first flight to Boston. He hung up the phone and immediately began to make arrangements for his trip. He called his boss, explained the situation, and asked for a few days of leave, which were promptly granted. While packing a small suitcase, Thomas tried to call Sarah, but the call went straight to voicemail. He left a brief message informing that he was on his way. On the plane, during the almost 2 hours of flight, Thomas couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor. The wise lady had become important to him, almost like the grandmother he had never met. And there was also the thought of seeing Sarah again. Her heart raced, just imagining. Upon arriving at the Boston airport, Thomas took a taxi directly to the nursing home. The sky was clear, a cruel contrast to the situation that awaited him. At the reception, they informed that Eleanor was in room 212 and that she had visitors at the time. Thomas hurriedly climbed up, his heart pounding against his chest. He stopped at the door of the room, hesitant. Through the opening, he could see Eleanor lying on the bed, looking frail and small between the white sheets. Sarah was sitting next to him, holding his hand. There was also a man Thomas didn't recognize, tall, gray-haired, wearing a dark suit. Thomas knocked softly on the door. Sarah looked up, and for a moment her face lit up at the sight of it. Then quickly, his expression changed to something more restrained, almost formal. "Thomas," she said, standing up, "I'm glad you came." He entered the room, feeling suddenly out of place. "I came as soon as I knew. How is she?" "Stable for now," Sarah replied, her voice strained. "Doctors say the next day will be crucial." Thomas approached the bed. Eleanor had her eyes closed, but when she felt his presence, she opened them slowly. "My young architect," she murmured with a faint smile. "You came." "Of course I came," Thomas replied, holding the old woman's wrinkled hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone who's had a stroke," Eleanor joked with a flash of her usual humor. "But I'm happy to see him again." The unknown man cleared his throat discreetly, catching Thomas's attention. "Oh, forgive my impoliteness," Sarah said, visibly uncomfortable. "Thomas, this is Michael Donovan." "Michael, this is Thomas Walker." "The famous Thomas," Michael commented, extending his hand. "Sarah talked a lot about you." Thomas shook the man's hand, noting the British accent and firm grip. "Nice to meet you." An awkward silence hung in the air until Eleanor spoke again. "Michael is the pastor of the church I attend," she explained, "and it's also a special friend of Sarah's now." Thomas felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. He looked at Sarah, who avoided his gaze, a slight blush tinging his cheeks. "I see," he said, trying to keep his composure. "It's good that Sarah has support in this difficult time." Michael smiled, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the air. "I'm here to help with whatever it takes. Eleanor is like family to me too." Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice to answer. He turned his attention to Eleanor, who watched him with keen eyes, as if he could read every thought in his mind. "Sarah, dear," said the old woman, "could you and Michael give me a few minutes alone with Tom? There's something important I need to tell him." Sarah seemed to hesitate, but nodded. "Sure, Grandma. We'll be in the cafeteria if you need anything." As Sarah and Michael left, closing the door behind her, Eleanor sighed deeply. "Don't judge my granddaughter harshly, Thomas," she said, in a weak but firm voice. "You're gone. Life went on." Thomas swallowed, feeling a sharp pain in his chest. "I don't blame her." "I don't blame her," Thomas repeated, trying to convince himself as much as Eleanor. 3 months is enough time to move on. Eleanor watched him with those wise eyes that seemed to see beyond word. "The heart has its own time, young man. For some, 3 months is an instant. For others, an eternity." Thomas sat in the chair Sarah had occupied, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulder. How did it happen? Sarah and this pastor. Michael started going to the coffee shop shortly after his departure, Eleanor explained. "He's a good man, Thomas. Kind, attentive, has helped Sarah with the coffee shop and, well, it has been there." Those last words hit Thomas like arrows. He was gone, and another man had been present. The cruel simplicity of the situation left him speechless. "It wasn't to talk about Michael that I asked us to be alone," Eleanor continued, her voice weakening slightly. "Remember when you asked me about my best friend? The one who never forsook me?" Thomas nodded, grateful for the change of subject. "Yes, you never got to tell me who you were." Eleanor smiled, a serene smile that lit up her pale face. "It's time for you to meet him, Thomas. In the drawer of the bedside table, there is a book. Could you get it for me?" Thomas opened the drawer and found a small book with a black cover, worn out by constant use. It was a Bible. "This is my best friend," Eleanor said, touching the book reverently as Thomas placed it in her hands. "The one who never abandoned me, even in the darkest moments." Thomas Thomas looked at the book, then at Eleanor, without fully understanding. "You look confused," she remarked with a faint smile. "I'm not just talking about the book itself, but who it represents. My friend is Jesus Christ, Thomas. He has been my rock, my refuge, my fortress." Thomas was not a religious man. After the death of his parents, any faith he might have had vanished. How could a loving God allow so much pain? "I know what you're thinking," Eleanor said, as if reading her thought. "How can I believe in a God who allows suffering? It's a valid question, one I've asked myself many times throughout my life." "And did you find an answer?" asked Thomas, genuinely curious. "Not a simple answer," Eleanor admitted, "but I found that even in the most violent storms of life, I was never alone. There is a presence, Thomas, a friend who walks with us even when the path seems impossible." Eleanor opened the Bible to a marked page and asked Thomas to read it aloud. He hesitated for a moment, but he couldn't deny this request to a woman who meant so much to him. "What a friend we have in Christ," read Thomas, "who bore our sorrows and bore our sorrows. What a privilege it is to bring everything to God in prayer." "This is a very old hymn," Eleanor explained, "based on a poem by Joseph Scriven. He wrote these words after losing his fiancée on the eve of their wedding. Instead of giving in to despair, he found comfort in his heavenly friend." Thomas felt something stir inside him. Scriven's story echoed his own loss, his own grief. "Thomas," continued Eleanor, her voice now almost a whisper, "when you left, Sarah was devastated. She smiled at the customers, took care of the coffee shop, came to visit me, but his eyes had lost their sparkle. That's when I started sharing with her about my best friend." "And did it help?" asked Thomas, his throat tightening. "Gradually," Eleanor replied. "Sarah started attending church with me. It was there that he met Michael. He helped her rediscover her faith, find the strength to move forward." Thomas nodded, trying to process it all. Part of him wanted to feel anger, jealousy, resentment, but another part, a part that surprisingly grew, felt only a deep sadness mixed with acceptance. "Why are you telling me that, Eleanor?" he asked finally. The old woman held his hand with surprising strength. "Because you need a friend like that too, Thomas. Someone who will never abandon you, no matter where life takes you." Thomas didn't know what to say. Faith had never been a significant part of his life, and now, in this moment of confusion and pain, it seemed too distant a concept. "I'm not asking you to believe it right away," Eleanor said, as if once again reading her thoughts. "Just keep your heart open to the possibility. Sometimes we find light in the most unexpected places." She closed her eyes for a moment, visibly tired. Thomas realized that the conversation had taken too much strain on his already diminished strength. "Get some rest," he suggested, adjusting her pillow. "I'll stay here." Eleanor smiled without opening her eyes. "You're a good man, Thomas Walker. Regardless of what happens between you and my granddaughter, never doubt it." Thomas sat by the bedside, watching Eleanor fall asleep. His thoughts were a whirlwind. Sarah, Michael, Chicago, Eleanor's faith, his own uncertain future. Everything seemed confusing and painful. He picked up the Bible Eleanor had shown him again and leafed through it absent-mindedly. The book was full of markings, notes in the margins, underlined passages. It was clearly an object of deep personal significance. A marked passage caught his attention. "Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do everything." Thomas pondered those words. Deliver your way, trust. Concepts that seemed simultaneously simple and impossible. The bedroom door opened softly, and Sarah entered alone. He seemed to have cried recently, but he kept his composure. "How is she?" he asked in a low voice, approaching the bed. "Sleeping," replied Thomas. The conversation tired her a little. Sarah nodded, keeping a cautious distance from Thomas. "Thank you for coming so quickly. It means a lot to her." "And for you?" The question escaped before Thomas could contain it. Sarah looked at it, her green eyes full of conflicting emotion. "Thomas, sorry," he interrupted quickly. "I don't have the right to ask that. You've moved on, and I respect that." "It's not that simple," Sarah said, sitting in the other chair in the room. "Nothing is that simple." A heavy silence settled between them, full of unspoken words and repressed feeling. "Michael seems like a good man," Thomas finally commented, trying to sound sincere. "He is," Sarah confirmed. "It's been a great support since you left." Thomas nodded, feeling each word like a small stab. "Eleanor told me a little about how you found comfort in faith." Sarah looked surprised. "Did Grandma talk about that? It's not typical typical of her to share these things so openly. I think she feels it's important, Thomas replied. She showed me her best friend. A small smile appeared on Sarah's lip. Oh yes, Jesus, the friend who never abandoned her. She told me the same thing when my parents died. And do you believe that? Asked Thomas, genuinely curious. That there is this friend who never abandons us? Sarah thought for a moment before answering. I believe there is something bigger than us, Thomas. Something that sustains us when we think we can no longer continue. Call it God, the universe, the life force. The name doesn't matter as much as the experience. Thomas pondered those words. It was a perspective I had never really considered. How's Chicago? Asked Sarah, changing the subject. Is your project going well? It is, he replied. The community center is taking shape. It's gratifying to see something you've drawn come to life. I always knew you could do it, Sarah said, with a genuine smile that made Thomas's heart sink. You have an extraordinary gift, Thomas. What about the coffee shop? He asked. How are things there? Busy, Sarah replied. I hired one more person to help, and I'm thinking of expanding, maybe opening a space for literary events in the back. That would be perfect for you, Thomas commented, remembering her dream of writing. Are you able to dedicate some time to writing? A glint appeared in Sarah's eye. Actually, yes. I started a novel a few weeks ago. It's still in the beginning, but that's wonderful, Sarah, Thomas said, feeling genuine pride. I always knew you had important stories to tell. At that moment, looking at Sarah talking about her dreams, Thomas felt a mixture of joy and sadness. Joy to see her moving forward, fulfilling herself. Sadness for no longer being part of this path. Eleanor shifted on the bed, attracting the attention of both of them. His eyes slowly opened, and a faint smile appeared on his lips as he saw the two of them together. My dear, she murmured, it's good to see them like this. Sarah came over and adjusted her grandmother's pillows. How are you feeling, Grandma? Like someone who is ready to go home, Eleanor replied, with a serenity that made Thomas shudder. Don't say that, Sarah protested, her voice breaking. You will get better. The doctor said that with physiotherapy and medication. Eleanor raised her wrinkled hand, silencing her granddaughter. Sarah, my dear, I have had a long and blessed life. I'm not afraid of what's next. Thomas watched the scene with a lump in his throat. Eleanor's peace in the face of the possibility of death was something he had never witnessed before, a quiet acceptance that seemed to transcend fear. Thomas, Eleanor called, turning to him. Promise me something. Anything, he replied. Promise that you will keep your heart open for all possibility. Thomas nodded, understanding that she was not just talking about fate, but about life, love, the future. I promise, Eleanor. The old woman smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes again. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to rest a little longer. Talk to the two of you. They have a lot to say to each other. Sarah and Thomas exchanged hesitant glances, but respected Eleanor's wish. They quietly left the room and walked to the garden of the nursing home, where the afternoon sun cast a golden light on the flower. She looks so in peace, Thomas commented, breaking the silence. It's always been like that, Sarah replied. Even after losing my grandfather, then my parents, she never lost that inner serenity. It's like there's a secret that the rest of us are still trying to figure out. Thomas thought of Eleanor's best friend, the faith that sustained her. Maybe it really does. They sat on a bench under a leafy tree. The distance between them was small in physical terms, but Thomas felt as if an ocean separated them. Michael and I, Sarah began hesitantly. It's not what you might be thinking. Thomas looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? Sarah sighed, nervously playing with the hem of her blouse. We are friends, yes. He has been a great support, but we are not. It's not a romantic relationship. Thomas felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by guilt. What right? Did he have to feel relief? He was gone. He had left Sarah behind. You don't need to explain, Sarah, he said softly. Even if it was, you have every right to move on. The problem is I can't, she confessed, teary-eyed. I tried, Thomas. I tried to move on, to forget what we had. But every customer who walks into the coffee shop and asks for you, every time I walk past the table where we met, Thomas felt his heart race. Sarah, No, she interrupted, raising her hand. Please let me finish. When you left, I was devastated, but I also understood. It was his dream, his opportunity. How could I ask him to stay? And I couldn't ask you to leave everything to come with me, Thomas added. Sarah nodded, wiping away a tear. So we got stuck in this impasse. Two hearts separated surrounded by 1,000 kilometers and impossible circumstances. Thomas mustered up his courage and took Sarah's hand between his own. To her relief, she did not take it out. "Do you know what hurts me the most?" she continued. "It's just that I still love you, Thomas. Even after these months, even trying to move on, my heart refuses to cooperate." Those words struck Thomas like a ray of light in the midst of darkness. "I love you too, Sarah. I never stop. Chicago has everything I've ever dreamed of professionally, but without you, it's just an empty city." They looked at each other, recognizing the truth in their word and also the impossibility of their situation. The love was there, as strong as before, but circumstances had not changed. "What do we do now?" asked Sarah, her voice trembling. Thomas didn't have an answer. How could they solve this dilemma? He couldn't abandon the project in Chicago, not after all the company's investment, and Sarah couldn't leave the coffee shop Eleanor, all her life in Boston. "I don't know," he finally admitted, "but maybe Eleanor is right. Maybe we need to keep our hearts open to the possibility." Sarah smiled through her tears. "She always knows what to say, doesn't she?" "A wise woman," Thomas agreed, with an even wiser friend apparently. At that moment, a nurse appeared in the garden looking for them. His expression was grave. "Miss Helena Sanchez Bennett, Mr. Walker, Mrs. Eleanor is asking for you, and also by Pastor Donovan." They stood up immediately, their hearts racing. Something in the nurse's expression said that the situation had changed. When they entered the room, they found Michael already there, holding one of Eleanor's hands. The old woman looked even more fragile, her breathing visibly laborious. "Oh, you came," she said with a weak smile. "My family is complete now." Sarah ran to her grandmother's side, holding her other hand. "Grandma, what happened? Do you feel anything?" "Just tiredness, dear," Eleanor replied. "It's a certainty. It's time to say goodbye." "Don't say that," Sarah pleaded, tears now flowing freely. "You'll be fine. It has to stay." Eleanor smiled tenderly. "My sweet Sarah, always trying to fix everything, take care of everyone. But some journeys, each one needs to do alone." She turned to Michael. "Pastor, could you read it to me? Psalm 23, please." Michael nodded, visibly moved. He took a small Bible from his pocket and began to read in a clear voice, despite the emotion. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me rest in green pasture. Lead me by the still waters." As Michael read, Thomas watched Eleanor's face. There was a peace there, a serenity that transcended the moment. It wasn't resignation, he realized, but acceptance. The acceptance of someone who knew exactly where he was going. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me." Sarah sobbed silently, shaking her grandmother's hand. Thomas placed his hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "Thomas," Eleanor called when Michael finished reading. "Come closer." He leaned over the bed, and Eleanor whispered in his ear, "Remember what we talked about the friend who never abandons us. And Thomas, take care of my Sarah." Before Thomas could answer, Eleanor turned to her granddaughter. "Sarah, my treasure," she said, her voice growing weaker and weaker. "Don't be afraid to follow your heart, wherever he takes her." "Grandma, please," Sarah pleaded. "Don't leave me." Eleanor smiled, a radiant smile that lit up her pale face. "I will never leave you, dear. I will always be with you, and our friend will be too." She closed her eyes, her breathing slowing down. What peace, what a wonderful light. Those were his last words. With a soft sigh, Eleanor Bennett departed this world, leaving behind a legacy of love, faith, and wisdom that had deeply touched everyone present. Guys, if this story is touching your heart, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments what you are feeling right now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss out on the continuation of this exciting journey of love and faith. The days that followed were a blur for Thomas and Sarah. Eleanor's funeral was a serene celebration of her life, just as she would have wished. Dozens of people attended, many of them customers of the coffee shop who had been touched by the kindness and wisdom of the elderly woman over the years. Michael conducted the ceremony with dignity and emotion, speaking of Eleanor's unwavering faith and her best friend, who had never abandoned her. Thomas noted how the pastor's words brought comfort to many of those present, including Sarah. After the funeral, Thomas helped Sarah organize Eleanor's belongings at the nursing home. It was a painful task, but there was also something therapeutic about reliving the memories through the objects the elderly woman had kept. "Look at that," Sarah said, opening a carved wooden box. It's the letters my grandfather sent her during the war. Thomas examined the yellowed envelopes, tied carefully with a faded ribbon. They must have loved each other very much, more than we can imagine, Sarah replied with a wistful smile. Grandma always said that she found love twice in her life, first with my grandfather, then with her best friend. Thomas nodded, remembering Eleanor's worn-out Bible. She gave me something before leaving. What? Asked Sarah, curious. Thomas hesitated. It was something personal, something I was still trying to understand. She asked me to keep my heart open for all possibilities. Sarah looked at him intensely. And are you going? I'm trying, he replied honestly. Among Eleanor's belongings, they found an envelope addressed to both of them. Inside was a letter written in the old woman's elegant handwriting, clearly worded before her stroke. Dear Thomas and Sarah, Sarah read aloud, her voice choked with emotion. If you're reading this, it means I've already left to meet my husband and my best friend. Don't be sad. For me, I'm exactly where I want to be. You two are the most precious people I leave in this world. Sarah, my dear granddaughter, you have been my joy since the day you were born. His strength, his goodness, his indomitable spirit, these are precious gifts that the world needs. Thomas, in such a short time you have become like a grandson to me. I saw in his eyes the same search, the same thirst that I once knew. You look for meaning, purpose, a place to belong. Dear ones, life rarely follows the paths we have planned. Sometimes the most unexpected detours take us exactly where we need to be. Do not be afraid to follow your hearts, even when the path seems uncertain. Sarah, always remember, your life is yours to live. The coffee shop, Boston, all of that, these are choices, not ordinary ones. His spirit has always been free as the wind. Do not be bound by obligation, not even by my memory. Thomas, your search for meaning will not end with buildings, no matter how beautiful they may be. True architecture is in the bonds we build, the lives we touch, the love we share. And to both, I leave my most precious treasure, the friendship that has sustained my entire life. My best friend is waiting to meet them too. He never gives up, never fails. In the most violent storm, he is the rock on which we can stand. With all my love, Eleanor. When Sarah finished reading, they were both in tears. The letter was so typically Eleanor. Why? Loving, defiant. She always knew what to say, Thomas said, wiping her eyes. And he always knew us better than we knew ourselves, Sarah added. They continued to organize their belongings quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. The loss of Eleanor had left a huge void, but there was also something new emerging, a clarity, a deeper understanding that was beginning to take shape. The night before Thomas returned to Chicago, they had dinner together at Sarah's apartment. The cafeteria was closed out of respect for Eleanor, and the silence of the place, normally so full of life, seemed appropriate for the occasion. What are you going to do now? Asked Thomas as he helped wash the dishes. Sarah sighed, looking out the window at the silent street. I don't know for sure. The coffee shop needs to reopen, of course. Customers depend on it. But beyond that, she paused, as if gathering the courage to continue. I've been thinking a lot about Grandma's words, about not arresting me out of obligation. Thomas watched her intently, noticing a new determination in her eye. I've always dreamed of writing, traveling, seeing the world, Sarah continued. The coffee shop was my parents' dream, not mine. I kept her out of love for them, then for Grandma. But now you are free to go your own way, Thomas added. Sarah nodded, a mixture of fear and excitement on her face. It's scary, isn't it? Freedom. Terrifying, Thomas agreed with a smile. But also wonderful. They finished washing the dishes and went to the small living room where they sat side by side on the sofa. Proximity was simultaneously comfortable and fraught with unresolved tension. What about you? Asked Sarah. Go back to Chicago tomorrow and then the project continues, Thomas replied. Probably for another 6 months until the community center opened. And then? Thomas hesitated. It was a question he had been asking himself. I don't know. I have other job offers in Chicago. The career I've always dreamed of is there, within reach. But, encouraged Sarah, sensing that there was more. But something has changed, Thomas admitted. Since Eleanor left, I've been thinking a lot about what really mattered, what I really want. They looked at each other, and in that look, there was a mutual understanding, a recognition of what still existed between them, despite the distance and time. Thomas, Sarah began, her voice little more than a whisper. What if, he encouraged. When she hesitated, Sarah took a deep breath, as if preparing for a swim in unknown waters. What if I went to Chicago? Not immediately, but after you sort everything out here. Sell the coffee shop, organize my life. I could write anywhere, and Chicago has a vibrant literary scene, and she paused, noticing Thomas's expression. What's wrong? It's a terrible terrible idea, isn't it? I'm being impulsive and Thomas silenced her with a kiss, soft, gentle, full of promise. As he walked away, there were tears in his eyes. It's the best idea I've ever heard, he said, his voice choked with emotion. But what if it doesn't work out? Asked Sarah, expressing her greatest fear. What if we are too different? We want different things. Thomas thought for a moment, remembering Eleanor's words. Then we will keep our hearts open for all possibilities. Sarah smiled, a smile that lit up her entire face, including the possibility that we have a friend who will never abandon us. Including that, Thomas agreed, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. That night, as Sarah slept in his arms, Thomas lay awake, watching the ceiling and reflecting on the strange paths life took. He had arrived in Boston devastated by the loss of Eleanor, fearing that he had also lost Sarah forever. And now, he left with a new hope, a new beginning. Before falling asleep, his eyes landed on the small Bible Eleanor had left him, his last gift. Thomas picked it up and opened it to a marked page, where a verse was, underlined, "For I know the thoughts I have about you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you the end you are waiting for." Thomas didn't know exactly what those words meant to him yet, but he felt a strange peace as he read them. Maybe Eleanor was right. Perhaps there really was a friend who would never abandon him, guiding his steps even when the path seemed uncertain. With this comforting thought, Thomas fell asleep, dreaming of possibility. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel to follow the conclusion of this exciting story. Leave in the comments what you think of this moment of revelation between Thomas and Sarah. Turn on notifications to be the first to know when the next video goes live.